The letter arrived at the Late Show offices on a Tuesday morning in September 2013, handwritten on pale blue stationery that smelled faintly of roses. The producer who opened it almost threw it away, thinking it was another fan letter, until she read the first line. "I'm writing to you about a man who has been mourning his wife for 15 years, and in doing so has created the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The letter was from Margaret Chen, a retired schoolteacher who lived on Maple Street in a quiet neighborhood in Westchester County, New York. She was writing about her neighbor, Arthur Morrison, a 74-year-old widower who had transformed his modest suburban backyard into something extraordinary. 3 weeks later, David Letterman stood in that very backyard, and for the first time in his 22 years of hosting late-night television, he found himself completely speechless. Arthur Morrison's garden was unlike anything David had ever seen. It wasn't large, maybe a quarter acre at most, but every single inch was meticulously maintained. Roses of every color imaginable climbed trellises and spilled over stone walls. Perennial beds burst with carefully coordinated blooms. A small pond reflected the sky, surrounded by hostas and ferns. Winding paths made of smooth river stones led to hidden benches. And at the very center of it all stood a white wooden arbor covered in the most stunning blue roses David had ever laid eyes on. "Midnight blue," Arthur said quietly, noticing where David's gaze had landed. "They were Eleanor's favorites. Took her 7 years to get them to grow properly in our climate. Said they reminded her of the ocean at twilight." Arthur Morrison was a tall man, though age had curved his shoulders slightly forward. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, silver hair that he combed carefully to the side, and hands that bore the marks of 15 years of daily gardening, calloused, scarred, strong despite his age. "Mr. Morrison," David said, finding his voice again, "Margaret's letter didn't do this justice. This is remarkable." Arthur shrugged modestly, the gesture of a man uncomfortable with praise. "It's just a garden. Eleanor did all the real work. I'm just the caretaker now." But it wasn't just a garden. David had done his research. He'd talked to the neighbors, read the local newspaper articles, spoken with the community garden club. What Arthur Morrison had created over the past 15 years wasn't just beautiful. It was a living memorial, a conversation between a man and his late wife conducted through soil and seeds and seasons. Eleanor Morrison had died on October 3, 1998, after a 6-year battle with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. She was only 59 years old. Arthur had been 59 as well, a successful architect with plans to retire early so he and Eleanor could travel the world together. The disease had stolen those plans, stolen Eleanor's memories, and eventually stolen Eleanor herself. But before the Alzheimer's took everything, Eleanor had one enduring passion: her garden. She'd started it 30 years earlier, when they first bought the house. What began as a few tomato plants and some marigolds had evolved into her life's work. She read every gardening book she could find. She took classes at the botanical garden. She experimented with rare species and kept meticulous journals documenting what worked and what didn't. The garden was where Eleanor felt most herself. Even as the Alzheimer's progressed, even when she couldn't remember Arthur's name or recognize their children, she still knew her flowers. She would stand in the garden, touching petals gently, and for brief moments, the fog would lift. She would turn to Arthur and smile, really smile, the way she used to. After Eleanor died, Arthur couldn't bring himself to touch the garden for nearly 3 months. He watched it slowly return to wildness through that first winter, unable to face the memories contained in every planted seed. His children begged him to move, to sell the house, to start fresh somewhere without so much pain. But one morning in late January, Arthur woke before dawn and found himself standing in the garden wearing his winter coat over his pajamas. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting pale light over Eleanor's neglected beds. And in that moment, Arthur understood something that would shape the rest of his life. The garden wasn't just Eleanor's. It was Eleanor. Her choices, her creativity, her hope, her belief that beautiful things could grow with patience and care. Letting it die would be like letting her die a second time. So Arthur, who had never particularly cared about gardening, who had always been too busy with blueprints and building projects to help Eleanor weed or prune, began to learn. He found Eleanor's journals, 53 notebooks filled with her careful handwriting, sketches, and pressed flowers. He read them cover to cover. He took the same classes she had taken. He joined the same garden club. He ordered seeds from the same catalogs. And every single day, without exception, for 15 years, Arthur tended Eleanor's garden. Now, standing in that garden with David Letterman and a camera crew, Arthur felt the familiar mixture of pride and grief that defined his daily routine. "Mr. Morrison," David said gently, "would you be willing to come to the show and tell this story? I think people need to hear it." Arthur hesitated. He wasn't comfortable with attention. He'd turned down interview requests from local news stations, declined features in gardening magazines. The garden wasn't for show. It was private, sacred, a conversation between him and Eleanor. But something in David's face, genuine respect, no trace of exploitation or sensationalism, made Arthur nod slowly. "Eleanor always liked your show," Arthur said quietly. "She said you were funny, but also kind. She'd probably get a kick out of knowing I was on it." David smiled. "Then let's make sure we do her proud." 2 weeks later, Arthur Morrison sat in the guest chair on the Late Show stage, more nervous than he'd been since his wedding day 52 years earlier. He wore his best suit, navy blue, the one he'd bought for his daughter's wedding. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. David's opening monologue was finishing up, something about the mayor and a hot dog vendor that Arthur didn't quite follow because his heart was pounding too loudly in his ears. Then David was at his desk, looking directly at him with that famous gap-toothed grin. "Folks, my guest tonight isn't a movie star or a politician. He doesn't have a book to sell or a product to promote. He's a 74-year-old widower from Westchester County who's been doing something quietly extraordinary for the past 15 years. Please welcome Arthur Morrison." The audience applauded warmly as Arthur stood and shook David's hand, then settled into the guest chair. The lights were brighter than he'd expected. He could barely see the audience beyond the glare. "Arthur, thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy for you." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Letterman. Please call me David. Now, I want to talk about your garden, but first I want to talk about Eleanor. Tell us about your wife." Arthur's throat tightened immediately. Even after 15 years, saying her name out loud to strangers felt like opening a wound. But he'd promised himself he would do this for Eleanor. Eleanor she was the best person I ever knew. We met in college. She was studying literature. I was studying architecture. She used to sit under this big oak tree on campus reading poetry, and I used to walk past that tree 5 times a day just hoping she'd notice me. The audience chuckled softly. David smiled encouragingly. Eventually, I worked up the courage to ask if I could sit with her. She said yes. We sat under that tree every day for the rest of the semester. Got married right after graduation, had 2 children, Sarah and Michael. Built a life together. And she loved gardening. Oh, she loved it more than anything, except maybe our kids, and me, I hope. Arthur managed a small smile. The garden was her masterpiece. She could make anything grow. Had this gift, this connection with living things. She'd talk to her plants like they were people. I used to tease her about it, but honestly, I think they listened. When did she get sick? Arthur took a deep breath. She was 53, started forgetting little things. Where she put her keys, what she went to the store for. We thought it was just stress, but it got worse quickly. By the time they diagnosed the Alzheimer's, it was already advanced, early onset, aggressive. David's expression shifted from entertainer to human being. "I'm so sorry." She fought it for 6 years. And you know what? Even when she couldn't remember me, couldn't remember our children's names, couldn't remember anything about her own life, she remembered her garden. She'd go out there and know exactly what each plant needed. It was like the garden was stored in a different part of her brain, somewhere the disease couldn't touch. Arthur's voice cracked. The audience was completely silent. The day before she died, she was having a good day. Moments of clarity. She asked me to take her to the garden. It was October, everything starting to fade for winter. She touched her midnight blue roses, the ones that took her years to cultivate, and she looked at me and said, "Arthur, promise me something. Don't let them die. Keep them alive. Keep me alive." Several people in the audience were openly crying now. David leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, completely focused on Arthur. "And you kept that promise." "I had to. For 3 months after she died, I couldn't even look at the garden. I watched it die a little every day, and I felt like I was dying with it. But then one morning I heard her voice in my head, not a hallucination or anything supernatural, just a memory of something she used to say. Gardens are about faith, Arthur. You plant something and trust it will grow. You tend it and trust your care matters. So I started tending. But you didn't just maintain it, David said. From what I understand, you've expanded it, improved it, made it even more beautiful than it was. Arthur nodded. Eleanor kept journals, 53 of them, plans she had, plants she wanted to try, dreams for what the garden could become. I've been working through them, one project at a time. Every spring, I plant something new she'd written about. Every fall, I improve something she'd sketched. It's like we're still working on it together. How often do you tend the garden? Every day, without exception. 5 o'clock in the morning until about 8. Then again in the evening, 6 to dark. Rain, snow, doesn't matter. I'm out there. David shook his head in amazement. Every single day for 15 years? It's not a chore, Arthur said firmly. It's a privilege. Every time I plant something, every time I prune or water or weed, I'm taking care of something she loved. I'm having a conversation with her. People think I'm alone out there, but I'm not. She's with me. The audience began to applaud spontaneously. Arthur looked startled, uncomfortable with the attention. David waited for the applause to die down. Arthur, your neighbors wrote to us. They call your garden Morrison's Miracle. They say people drive from all over the county just to walk past your house. They say it's brought the whole community together. Did you know that? Arthur shrugged modestly. People are kind. They appreciate beauty. That's Eleanor's doing, not mine. I disagree, David said gently. Eleanor created something beautiful, but you've kept it alive, expanded it, and shared it with the world. That's your doing. That's your gift to her and to everyone who sees it. Arthur's eyes filled with tears behind his glasses. He removed them, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. I'm sorry, I don't usually... Please don't apologize. This is real. This matters. David paused, then smiled mysteriously. Arthur, I want to show you something. We've kept a secret from you for the past 3 weeks, and I hope you'll forgive us for the deception. Arthur looked confused as David gestured to the wings. A woman in her early 40s walked onto the stage carrying a small potted plant. She had the careful walk of someone holding something precious. Arthur, this is Dr. Patricia Chen. She's a botanist at the New York Botanical Garden. Dr. Chen placed the pot on David's desk. Inside was a single rose bush with buds just beginning to open. Even in bud form, Arthur could see they were blue. Not the deep midnight blue of Eleanor's roses, but a softer, lighter shade, like a summer sky at dusk. Mr. Morrison, Dr. Chen said, her voice warm and professional. About 3 years ago, your neighbor Margaret Chen, my mother, brought me some seeds from your garden, specifically from your midnight blue roses. She asked if it might be possible to create a new cultivar, something unique in honor of your wife. Arthur's hand went to his mouth. He stared at the plant like it might disappear if he looked away. We've been working with those seeds, crossbreeding them with several other varieties, trying to create something special. And we did. This is a new rose cultivar, officially registered. It's called Eleanor's Legacy. The buds were beginning to open under the stage lights, unfurling to reveal petals of the softest sky blue, edged with white, with a center that held just a hint of Eleanor's original midnight blue. It's hardy, Dr. Chen continued. It'll grow in almost any climate. It blooms from May through October, and it has the most incredible fragrance. My team says it smells like ocean air and honey. Arthur stood up slowly, walking to the desk like a man in a dream. He reached out, then hesitated, looking at Dr. Chen for permission. Go ahead, she said softly. It's yours. This one and 50 others we've cultivated for your garden. Arthur touched a petal with one trembling finger. Then he broke down completely, his shoulders shaking with sobs. David stood and walked around the desk, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder. The audience watched in absolute silence as this 74-year-old man wept over a flower that bore his late wife's name. When Arthur finally composed himself enough to speak, he looked at Dr. Chen with wonder. Eleanor's legacy? Eleanor's legacy, she confirmed, officially registered with the International Rose Registry. It'll be available commercially next year. People all over the world will be able to grow your wife's roses in their own gardens. Arthur laughed through his tears. She would have loved that. She always wanted to share beauty with people. She used to say that gardens shouldn't be hoarded. Beauty is meant to be given away. David, whose own eyes were wet, addressed the audience. Folks, here's the thing. Arthur has been tending his wife's garden every single day for 15 years. Never missed a day. Never took a vacation. Never stopped showing up. And what he created isn't just beautiful. It's inspired an entire community. It's become a landmark, a place where neighbors gather, where people propose, where children learn about plants, where anyone who's grieving can go and remember that beautiful things can still grow. He turned to Arthur. You asked me earlier, before the show, why we wanted to tell your story. You said you're just doing what anyone would do. But Arthur, that's not true. Most people move on. They pack up the memories and try to start fresh. You did something different. You honored your grief by creating beauty. You turned loss into legacy. And now, because of Dr. Chen's work, Eleanor's legacy is going to bloom in gardens all over the world. The audience rose to their feet, applauding. Arthur stood there, holding the potted rose, tears streaming down his face, looking overwhelmed by the love in the room. But David had one more surprise. Arthur, please sit down for just one more minute. Arthur returned to the guest chair, still clutching the rose plant. Your children, Sarah and Michael, are here tonight. They're in the audience, but they're not alone. The camera panned to show Arthur's daughter, Sarah, his son, Michael, and between them, 6 people of varying ages. Your grandchildren wanted to be here for this, all 6 of them, and they have something they want to ask you. The youngest grandchild, a girl of about 8, stood up. Her voice was clear and strong, though Arthur could see her hands shaking. Grandpa, you've taken care of Grandma's garden for our whole lives. We never got to meet Grandma Eleanor because she died before most of us were born, but we know her because of you and because of the garden. You've shown us what love looks like, what devotion looks like. She paused, looking at her older siblings for support. Her teenage brother stood up next. Grandpa, we know you've never taken a vacation. You've never missed a day in the garden. You've never stopped keeping your promise to Grandma. But Grandpa, we want you to know that we see you. We love you, and we want to help. Arthur looked confused, glancing between his children and grandchildren. Sarah, his daughter, stood up now, tears streaming down her face. Dad, we've all learned to garden. Every single one of us has been taking secret lessons for the past 6 months. We've studied Grandma's journals. We've learned about her plants, her methods, her vision. Michael, his son, joined in. Dad, we want you to take a break, just a week. We'll take care of the garden, together, all of us, the way it should be, as a family. We've planned a trip, Sarah continued, to the coast of Maine, where you and Mom always talked about going, but never did. We've rented a cottage. Ocean views. You'll go in 3 weeks, right at peak foliage season. For 1 week, we'll tend the garden. We promise we won't let you down. We promise we'll take care of it like you've taught us. Arthur couldn't speak. He looked at David, who was smiling through his own tears. Your family loves you, Arthur. They want to honor Eleanor too, not by taking the garden from you, but by sharing the burden, by making it a family project, the way perhaps it always should have been. Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. You'd do that? All of you? His 8-year-old granddaughter nodded vigorously. Grandpa, you've shown us what love looks like. Now let us love you back. The standing ovation lasted for over 3 minutes. David didn't try to stop it. He just stood there with Arthur, one hand on the older man's shoulder, letting the moment breathe. When the show finally went to commercial, the cameras kept rolling backstage as Arthur's entire family gathered around him. They stood in a circle in the green room, passing around the Eleanor's legacy rose, each person holding it for a moment, making their own silent promise to the woman they'd never met but knew through the garden she'd left behind. 3 weeks later, Arthur Morrison stood on a rocky beach in Maine, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of blue that reminded him achingly of Eleanor's midnight blue roses. His children had driven him here, refused to let him back out, promised him daily photos of the garden. For the first time in 15 years, Arthur Morrison was not in his garden at 6 o'clock in the evening, and for the first time in 15 years, he didn't feel guilty about it. He pulled out his phone, a device his grandchildren had insisted he carry, and looked at the photo Sarah had texted him an hour ago. All 6 grandchildren in the garden, dirty and smiling, holding tools, surrounding Eleanor's rose arbor. The caption read, "Day 3. Everything thriving. Missing you. So proud to be doing this. Love you, Grandpa." Arthur smiled, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He picked up a smooth blue stone from the beach, turning it over in his palm. It was almost the same color as the Eleanor's legacy roses. "I kept my promise," he said softly to the ocean, to the sunset, to Eleanor wherever she was. "For 15 years I kept your garden alive. But now I'm going to let our family keep it alive. Together, the way you would have wanted." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt and pine, and Arthur could have sworn he heard Eleanor's voice, that warm laugh she had, saying what she always said when he worried too much. "Arthur, love isn't about holding on so tight nothing can change. It's about tending something carefully and trusting it will grow." Arthur stayed on that beach until the stars came out, holding his blue stone, feeling lighter than he had in 15 years. When he returned home a week later, the garden was more beautiful than he'd ever seen it. His family had followed Eleanor's journals perfectly, but they'd also added their own touches. Small painted stones along the pathways with messages: Eleanor's dream, Arthur's love, family forever. And in the center, newly planted in a circle around the rose arbor, were 50 Eleanor's legacy rose bushes, the gift from Dr. Chen, their soft blue blooms glowing in the afternoon light. Arthur stood in his garden with his children and grandchildren gathered around him, and he finally understood what he'd been too lost in grief to see 15 years ago. Eleanor's garden wasn't meant to be his burden alone. It was meant to be a gift he would one day pass on, the way Eleanor had passed it to him, the way he was now passing it to them. That evening, at 6 o'clock, Arthur was in his garden, as always, but this time he wasn't alone. His 8-year-old granddaughter knelt beside him, carefully deadheading roses the way he'd taught her. His teenage grandson was trimming the hedges. His daughter was planting new bulbs for spring. His son was repairing the trellis. And Arthur Morrison, for the first time in 15 years, wasn't just the caretaker of Eleanor's garden. He was the teacher, passing on her wisdom, her passion, her belief that beautiful things grow when tended with love and patience. David Letterman kept the Eleanor's legacy rose in his own garden at home. Every year when it bloomed, he thought about Arthur Morrison and the quiet power of showing up, day after day, for the people we love, even after they're gone. The Late Show episode featuring Arthur aired 3 weeks after the taping. It became one of the most shared segments in the show's history, viewed over 40 million times online. People from around the world wrote letters to Arthur, sharing their own stories of loss and the ways they kept memories alive. But the most profound impact was local. Arthur's garden became an official community landmark. The town installed a small plaque near the sidewalk. Eleanor's garden, tended with love by Arthur Morrison, a testament to devotion. And when the Eleanor's legacy roses became commercially available the following spring, they sold out within a week. Gardens across the country bloomed with soft blue roses, each one a small echo of one woman's passion and one man's extraordinary promise. Arthur Morrison lived to be 89 years old. He tended Eleanor's garden every single day until the last month of his life, when his grandchildren took over completely, not with sadness, but with honor. When he died peacefully in his sleep on a mild October evening, his family buried his ashes in the garden, beneath the white arbor covered in midnight blue roses, next to where they'd buried Eleanor 15 years earlier. And the garden continued to bloom, tended now by children and grandchildren who'd learned from Arthur what Eleanor had once taught him: that love doesn't end with death, it transforms. It yet grows, it blooms in unexpected colors and spreads its beauty far beyond what we can imagine. The last thing Arthur said, the day before he died, was to his youngest granddaughter as she showed him photos of the garden on her phone. "Tell me, sweetheart, how did the Eleanor's legacy roses look this year?" She smiled through her tears. Grandpa, they're beautiful. They're everywhere. People all over the world are growing them now. Arthur smiled, his eyes distant, seeing something beyond the hospital room. Good. That's good. She always wanted to share beauty with the world. Now she's doing it, even from heaven. He closed his eyes, his hand holding his granddaughter's, and whispered one last thing. She's still blooming. And she was. Across the country, across the world, in gardens tended by people who'd never met Eleanor Morrison, but knew her story, the Eleanor's legacy, roses bloomed soft blue against the green, proof that love, carefully tended, never really dies. It just keeps growing.